Some foods are so dangerous, so controversial, or so unethical that entire countries have made them illegal, from a cheese full of living maggots to a fish that kills you instantly. These are 15 of the most banned foods on Earth. The Opium Wars were two devastating conflicts between Imperial China and the British Empire, and they were fundamentally caused by tea. Britain's national obsession with Chinese tea drained its silver reserves and pushed it to find any way to balance the trade. Britain solved its tea debt crisis by flooding China with illegal opium grown in India. When China's emperor banned opium and burned 1,200 tons of it, Britain declared war to protect its tea-paying drug trade. They won and seized Hong Kong as the prize. Britain's tea addiction was so extreme that by 1830, 1 in 10 Chinese people was addicted to opium. The wars killed tens of thousands and broke China's economy for a century, all so the English could keep drinking tea every afternoon. In the 1830s, a French pastry chef named Remontel ran a shop in Mexico City. He claimed Mexican officers ate his pastries during a riot and refused to pay. He sent the bill to King Louis Philippe of France, demanding 600,000 pesos in damages. Mexico refused to pay, so France did what empires do. They sent the Navy. The French Atlantic Squadron blockaded Veracruz and bombarded the city, fighting Mexican forces led by General Santa Anna, who lost his leg in the battle. All over unpaid pastries. Mexico eventually paid France 600,000 pesos to end the war. Santa Anna kept his amputated leg in a glass urn and gave it a state funeral. To this day, historians call this the most absurd war in modern history, fought entirely over French pastries. Between 1958 and 1976, tiny Iceland fought 3 separate naval conflicts against Britain, a country 1,000 times its size. The reason? Cod. Iceland's economy depended entirely on its cod fishing waters, which British trawlers had fished for centuries. Iceland extended its fishing zone 3 times, from 4 miles to 200 miles. Britain refused to recognize the new limits and sent Royal Navy warships to protect its trawlers. Icelandic Coast Guard ships cut British fishing nets with steel blades. The Royal Navy rammed them. The Cold War nearly went hot. Iceland won all 3 cod wars. They threatened to leave NATO and close the strategic American base at Keflavik, and Britain was forced to back down each time. A nation of 200,000 people beat the Royal Navy using nothing but fishing line cutters and cod. Between 1898 and 1934, the United States military repeatedly invaded countries in Central America and the Caribbean: Honduras, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Cuba, Haiti, the Dominican Republic. Every single invasion served one master, the United Fruit Company, and one product, bananas. United Fruit owned massive banana plantations across the region. When local governments tried to raise taxes, reform land laws, or unionize workers, the company called Washington and the U.S. Marines arrived. The CIA-backed 1954 coup in Guatemala was literally to protect banana profits. The term Banana Republic was invented to describe countries controlled by United Fruit. By 1930, the company owned more land in Central America than entire nations did. Millions of people lived and died as plantation workers, all so Americans could enjoy cheap bananas with breakfast. For decades, British India had banned Indians from making or selling their own salt, forcing them to buy heavily taxed British salt instead. Salt is a survival necessity in tropical India, where people lose it constantly through sweat. The British turned it into a tool of colonial control. On March 12, 1930, Mahatma Gandhi began walking 240 miles to the Arabian Sea. Tens of thousands joined him along the way. On April 6th, he picked up a single grain of natural salt from the beach, illegally, and held it up. That tiny grain triggered mass civil disobedience that broke British rule in India. Britain arrested 80,000 Indians for making salt. The Salt March became the spark that ended a 200-year empire. 17 years later, India was independent, all because one man bent down on a beach to pick up something the ocean had freely made for billions of years. Until 1621, nutmeg grew naturally on only 10 tiny islands in the Indonesian archipelago, the Banda Islands. In Europe, nutmeg was worth more than gold. It was believed to cure plague. Whoever controlled Banda controlled the most profitable spice on earth. The Dutch East India Company demanded a monopoly. When the Bandanese refused to honor a one-sided contract, Dutch General Jan Pieterszoon Cohen invaded with Japanese mercenaries. He executed the village leaders, burned the islands, and massacred or enslaved nearly the entire native population. Out of 15,000 Bandanese people, only 1,000 survived. Cohen replaced them with Dutch enslaved laborers and seized total control of the global nutmeg trade. Nutmeg made the Dutch the richest people in the world and erased an entire civilization in the process. In 1859, the border between the United States and British Canada in the San Juan Islands was disputed. Both countries claimed the islands and stationed settlers there. On June 15th, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler shot a Berkshire pig that was eating his potatoes. The pig belonged to the British. When British authorities tried to arrest Cutler, American settlers requested military protection. The U.S. sent 461 soldiers and 14 cannons. Britain sent 5 warships, 70 cannons, and 2,140 troops. Both sides waited weeks for orders to attack. Just one shot, and the British Empire and United States would have been at full war over a dead pig. Officers on both sides knew the war was insane and refused to fire first. They waited and waited. After 12 years of joint military occupation, an international arbiter, the Emperor of Germany, gave the islands to the USA. The only casualty of the pig war was one pig. In the early 1960s, French fishing fleets sailed across the Atlantic to fish for spiny lobsters off the coast of Brazil. Brazil declared lobsters a national maritime resource and ordered the French to leave. France's argument was unforgettable. Lobsters swim, so they are international. Brazil's response, lobsters don't swim. They crawl on our continental shelf. France sent the destroyer Tartu and a fleet of warships. Brazil mobilized its Navy and Air Force in response. For 2 years, 2 real navies threatened each other in the open Atlantic over lobsters. The Lobster War ended with negotiations, and France finally accepted that Brazilian lobsters belonged to Brazil. The conflict is still studied in international law as a key precedent for the modern 200-mile exclusive economic zone. A war that defined ocean borders, fought entirely over crawling shellfish. In 1791, the new United States government, desperate to pay off Revolutionary War debt, passed a tax on distilled spirits. Most heavily affected were western Pennsylvania farmers who turned their excess grain into whiskey to survive. Whiskey wasn't just their drink, it was their currency. Farmers tarred and feathered tax collectors. Mobs attacked federal officials. In 1794, 7,000 armed rebels marched on Pittsburgh. President George Washington personally led 13,000 troops, the only sitting U.S. president ever to command an army in the field. The rebellion collapsed without major bloodshed. The Whisky Rebellion was the first major test of the new American federal government's authority. Washington proved Washington had teeth. Many of the rebels fled west into Kentucky and Tennessee, taking their stills with them and giving birth to American bourbon as we know it today. On December 16, 1773, in the dark of night, around 60 American colonists disguised themselves as Mohawk Native Americans and boarded 3 British East India Company ships in Boston Harbor. Their target, 342 chests of British tea. Their grievance, a tax they had no vote to refuse. In 3 hours, the colonists smashed open every chest and dumped 92,000 pounds of British tea into Boston Harbor. The damage equaled roughly $1.7 million today. Britain's response was crushing taxes and military occupation, which only united the colonies. Less than 3 years later, they declared independence. Americans never fully went back to tea after that night. They switched to coffee. To this day, the United States is one of the largest coffee-drinking countries on Earth, and Britain is one of the largest tea-drinking nations. A single act of tea dumping rewired 2 continents' eating habits for 250 years. In 1896, Zanzibar was the world's largest exporter of cloves, a spice essential to global trade and worth a fortune. Britain controlled Zanzibar as a protectorate to protect its clove monopoly. When the pro-British Sultan died unexpectedly, his cousin Khalid bin Bargash seized the palace without British approval. Britain ordered Khalid to surrender by 9 a.m. On August 27, 1896, he refused. At 9:02 a.m., 5 British warships opened fire on the palace. By 9:40 a.m., the palace was destroyed, around 500 defenders were dead, and Khalid was running for his life. The entire war lasted just 38 minutes. The Anglo-Zanzibar War remains the shortest war ever recorded in human history. Britain installed a new pro-British sultan within hours. The clove trade continued flowing into European kitchens, and an entire kingdom was crushed in less time than it takes to watch a sitcom. In September 1788, the Austrian Imperial Army of 100,000 soldiers was marching to attack the Ottoman Empire. Outside the town of Karánsebes, an advance unit of Austrian hussars found a group of local Roma traders selling barrels of cheap schnapps, strong fruit brandy. The hussars bought every barrel and got drunk. Austrian infantry arrived next and demanded their share. The hussars refused. Arguments turned violent. Shots were fired. A panicked hussar yelled, "Turks! Turks!" and the army began firing at imagined enemies. In the chaos and darkness, the army fought itself, mistaking comrades for Ottoman invaders. By morning, somewhere between hundreds and 10,000 Austrian soldiers lay dead, killed by their own army. When the Ottoman forces arrived 2 days later, they walked into an abandoned battlefield and captured Karánsebes without firing a shot. An entire imperial army defeated by a few barrels of fruit brandy.